Hello and welcome to Monday morning's Gaelic Life podcast, which means one thing only: is a roundup around the counties of Ulster. As the counties are getting thinner on the ground in terms of teams, we're getting closer to cups being handed out. Joined this morning by Neil Loughran from the Irish News to chat all things down. Neil, you're down to four, carried offer through, and Kilcoo are in their 14th final in a row, going for title number 7. So the more things change, the more it all stays the same with Kilcoo. So
Yeah,
I don't start off with first.
Kilcoo.
Yeah,
Um, aye, well, look, I'd say this morning Clonduff will be it'll be a rough morning to be waking up, because that was a big opportunity for Clonduff. They got a lot right last night. From obviously they had played in the championship earlier in the championship. Kilcoo were convincing enough winners that night, but last night maybe the conditions as well suited Clonduff. Clonduff have like one of their big strengths is there a lot of good shooters from distance, and there was hardly a breeze last night at all. So the likes of Charlie Carr and Arthur McConville, Ross, Eamon Brown, and like they were. I think they were 1 point ahead of Kilcoo 2 or 3 times, but they could just never quite get that bit of momentum to kick on. And in the second half, I know there maybe be a bit of focus on the free that Charlie Carr missed at the end to that would have I think it would have been a 2 point free. Actually, I was way down the bottom end of the pitch at that stage, but I think it might have been 2 point free, which would have put them through. But really, there was 3 or 4 other bad wides in the second half that I'd say they'll be looking at when they do have a bit of a post-mortem and thinking that's maybe where we missed the boat there, because we've seen it time and again with Cuckoo through the years, Mal. Like you kind of have to put the boot on the throat when the chance is there. Glenn did it, in those couple of meetings that they had with Cuckoo, and Clonduff maybe slightly let them off the hook last night. But again, we say I'm nearly loath to say that, because we sort of say that every year, and I hear this stuff every year about, oh, Cuckoo aren't going well, and they're just scraping by and they're just doing it. That's just the way, you know what I mean? Like, somebody messaged me on Twitter this morning and said, like, what is it about Cuckoo? Like, I've never seen a team who's won so many county titles and but never hammers anybody. Do you know what I
mm-hmm.
mean? Like, they win these games by just enough all the time, and they're just that can't just be accident or fluke. You know what I mean? Like, there's something about the way that they go about games, and the way that they manage games when they're in them, that they never lose the heads. They're always retain an element of control, I suppose. Like, and then you've somebody like Keelan Doherty, obviously, who popped up with what turned out to be the winning score last night. So yeah, I mean, it's the old thing of writing them off at their peril, or talking or listening to the talk about them maybe not firing on all cylinders. Like, I mean, when you look down their bench last night, Eugene Brannigan came on for the last few minutes. Connor Laverty's there. There's a lot of strength and depth. Aaron Brannigan came back in last night. I think that was his first appearance of the year. So, like, there's a lot of. I think there's still a fair bit to come from Kilcoo.
And the thing about it is, whenever you have won so many tight games, I suppose we can't speak for the Kilcoo players because we're not inside the bubble, but it would just appear that you never ever panic. Like, as
Mm.
somebody from the outside was just refreshing Twitter last night, and you kept saying, like, is this going to be the day? A wee bit like the penalty shootout night, where you're thinking, is this
Mhm.
going to be the day? But there just must be an unbelievable level of belief. They've obviously got a system that really works, but belief has to be so important to everything that they do, because, as we often say, what do they have?
Mm. When you've been there so many times, Mal, like that, I think that's obviously where the belief comes from. You know what I mean? Because what's probably slightly forgotten sometimes in the Cuckoo story, because we're so used to them winning, certainly in down, but like in maybe 4 or 5 years before Kilcoo made the breakthrough in 2009, they lost those close games. You know,
Mhm.
they were losing to, to maybe Mayorbridge or Clonduff or whoever, and so there's something ingrained in them over time, because obviously, like, you don't win that many county titles by luck, you know what I mean? So there's something about the way that they're able to manage games, and you always hear that when you speak to whoever happens to be over them, whether it's Conleth, Gilligan, or Marty Corey this year. Like, you talk to those boys about what it is about Kilcoo, guys who maybe have come from the outside, um, to see what they're all about. And they always talk about, like, they've never had a group of players who are, in terms of managing themselves and when they're on the pitch, managing games, managing the tempo of things, knowing when to. And like, again, Conor Laverty has to be a huge factor in that too, because not only was he a player for so many of the years, but he's such an integral, and he still is a player. But he's obviously an integral player, or an integral figure in everything, and he is one of the old guard that they still have there. Obviously, they still have the likes of Niall Brannigan, Niall Kane, Paul Devlin. But and those guys have been there and seen it, and that's probably, I think those guys probably imbue a lot of the belief that Kilcoo have with the younger ones too, in terms of not panicking, not losing heads, because, again, probably another part of the Kilcoo story that was sometimes forget, but there was a time where Kilcoo maybe had a bit of a name for, getting rattled, losing their heads, maybe, getting yellow cards, red cards, disciplinary stuff,
Mhm.
that really very seldom happen. I know Darrell Brannigan was sent off in the Ulster semi-final last year against Errigal, and it turned the game, but in a general sense, that like that they're very, very disciplined in the way they go about things, like, and in terms of how they manage games. So I'd say that's where a lot of their belief comes from. Is just that familiarity and being there for so long. Just that spreads.
And before we go on to the other semi-final, Neil, Clonduff, like you say, they're going to wake up really, really disappointed. Uh, what is it? Is it getting back on the horse is a really difficult thing to think about at the moment, and next week, and the week after, and the month after. But
Mm.
ahead of next year, they have to just believe that they can do it. And I know that's that word again, belief.
Yeah.
Nothing
Well,
we're going to say is going to make them feel any better or change the situation.
no.
But how close?
I well, look, I mean, like that night that you mentioned earlier on, the penalty shootout, was as close as they've come, and probably a lot of similarities to last night. Like, they got an awful lot right that night. Troubled Kilcoo physically at times, and yeah, like that was the year after Kilcoo had won the All Ireland,
Mhm.
and that, so like that was a big opportunity, and obviously they lost on penalties. Last night was something similar, and I just wonder, like, these two seem to meet a lot. Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like there's rarely a championship season goes by when Kilcoo and Clonduff don't meet. Considering they don't meet in the final. They,
Mhm.
they always seem like there's quite a few years over the last 10 years where they've maybe met twice since the backdoor system came in. So they're and obviously, they're 5 miles apart. Um, a lot of the families are related. Like the Brannigans would have a lot of connections in Hilltown and so forth, and so, like, I'd say, you wonder with Clonduff, is there that wee bit of a psychological thing of having come so close before and not being able to get over the line,
Mhm.
and then on other times being routed by Kilcoo, like, because if you remember, actually, that year, the year when they did come so close to the penalties, I think maybe they had played Kilcoo in the first round and been well beaten. Like, I think Kilcoo maybe scored 4 goals that night. So you just you just wonder, like, why whenever they seem to be getting on top, they can't just maintain that control, because it looked at times last night like they might, like, you could see the crowd was really, really rising to it. Like, Barry O'Hagan come on last night, for the last, might have been 10 or 15 minutes, and he scored 2 unbelievable 2 pointers, like within 2 or 3 minutes of each other. Like, and that at that point, like that's when you started to think, like, all of us in the press box going, geez, you know what, they might actually do it here, because you could feel the lift. Obviously, Barry, with the injury problems he's
Mm-hmm.
had, coming back in, what a story it would have been. And like, honestly, I can't overstate how good these scores were. And you just thought, geez, maybe it is, but again, you have to capitalize on that, like, and they didn't, and they probably coughed up possession a couple of times. As I said, couple of wides that give Kaku the chance to reset and come back, and it's another hard luck story.
The other semi-final carried off 20.9. Does the scoreline tell the story, or is there more?
I think, like, carried off were by far the better team. Put it this way: Burns scored 1 point in 54 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Like they went 1-3 to nothing ahead after 6 minutes, and managed one or 2 points after that. Was it, or 2 points? So like they were so 2 points after that. Yeah. So like they were. I thought Byrne were very one dimensional. And I think, if you take the pace of Liam Kerr and Danny McGill out of any team,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you're gonna notice that. Like, and for Liam Kerr to not even be able to be on the bench, like, as an option, that really limited what they had. Like what, you know, they're bringing on Donal O'Hare and Kevin McKernan at the end of games, who guys who've given so much to Burn over the years. You know what I mean? But they're maybe not going to come on unless, well, maybe Donal, I suppose, always has a goal in him. But like, when you're looking to salvage the game, it never looked likely. Like, Carried-off were really in control for a lot of it. And actually, like, I was talking to somebody this morning, like, Carried-off really, they weren't amazing either. You know what I mean? They didn't have to be. They just got, like, they left a lot of shots behind them, coughed up a fair bit of possession, but they obviously knew that the inspiration that Oren Murdoch has been, throughout this championship for Byrne, especially since Danny McGill's injury. um, that they had they couldn't allow him to dictate it, to dictate things, because when he plays, Byrne play.
Mm-hmm.
And yesterday, to be fair, they got that spot on. Like, Owen Donnelly was fantastic. Probably one of the few guys in down, physically able to really match up to Murdoch, and he did yesterday. Like, he was won a lot of ball, but even, like, I thought, like, Connor Cassidy, he moved on to Ryan Trainer. Like, Ryan Trainer had started really well, and when Cassidy moved on to him, then you could just see Byrne just, they started to take shots from that probably weren't on. They had a bit of a breeze at their back, and they were obviously, the temptation of the 2 pointer is there, but like, they finished up with 15 wides. They lost their heads a bit in the end. Like, Murdoch was lucky not to be sent off, like, and which is very unlike him. Like, he's normally, one of his big assets is his temperament. Like, you really never see him get ruffled, which probably shows just how frustrated he was by how the day went, because it just wasn't his day at all, and it wasn't Burns' day. And yeah, big, but a big day for Carried-off nonetheless. Like, only the second ever senior final, and a bit of an opportunity for this. Like, they are one of the teams that's talked about at the start of every year, because there's a bit of a hate, like, using the term goal. Well, I don't hate it using it that much, because I say it all the time, but a golden generation slightly, we carried off in that they had a team that won a hat trick of county under 21 titles, and a lot, I think maybe at least 7 or 8 of those guys, now form the backbone of this team.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so there was that kind of question of whether they could finally realize that potential, and not just be nearly men. And they haven't, like, even when they did reach the final in 2020, Mal, like, they didn't beat, like, they beat Ballyholland in the semi-final and stuff, like, and they didn't probably take out a Clonduff or a Burn, or and then they lost to Kilcoo in the final. You know what I mean? So I think psychologically yesterday, was a big win for them, because they hadn't until now, they hadn't taken out one of the big dogs in championship. So you wonder what impact that'll have in terms of belief for them going into the final.
And obviously, we'll talk in the pod. It's just a purely belief thing. How do they close out the fact they're playing Kilcoo? Do they meet it head on? Because 14 finals in a row is a remarkable level of consistency, Neil, that the Carrick are going to take on.
Yeah, I don't think you can close it out, Mal, because that's part of what makes Kilcoo what they are. Like, probably a lot of teams, not that they're beaten before they take the field, but they're like Kilcoo have a psychological advantage over everybody in Down, and there's no escaping that. They just do. Because how could they not? If you've been so dominant, then and everybody talks about you, and they're the benchmark. Like, and at times, the gap has closed between other clubs, but Kilcoo always managed to pull it back out again. So, but in terms of like actual psychological scars against Kilcoo, Carryduff don't have loads. Like, they lost that 2020 final, which was a weird one in a lot of ways, because obviously, it was a COVID final, so there's nobody there. Very, small crowd only was allowed in. A lot of the guys who are now 26, 27, 28 were obviously all, 22, 23, 24 then. It was all new. Cardiff had never been there. So they haven't, like, I think they've only met them a couple of times since in championship. They've met them, and they've been close. Like, I mean, they met them in, I think, 2021 or 2022, and it went to extra time. Cardiff very very nearly had Kilcoo that day. And then they met in Downpatrick 2 years ago, and Cardiff should have, like, Cardiff were, I think, 4-1 up or 5-2 up at half time, which under the old rules, like, and the kind of game that it was, like, Cardiff were pretty solid defensively. Like, that felt like a really big lead. But then an experience, like the Kane Clinton got sent off just before halftime, like, silly red card. And then Darrell Brannigan scored a point, and all of us, just before halftime, and all of a sudden Kilcoo's tails were up. Cardiff got a couple more guys sent off, and it ran away from them. I think they lost by 3 or 4 in the end. But, like, so they don't have a history of getting wiped out by Kilcoo. You know what I mean? Like, they've a history of going into games against Kilcoo with no fear, really, and sort of thinking, they have a cut them, and they have the athleticism and the size to trouble Kilcoo. Like, there's no doubt about it. Like, you look across that Kilcoo or that Carried-off team yesterday, and there's a lot of big men in there, and there's a lot of pace, a lot of athleticism, as I say. So, like, I think of all the teams, whereas, you can kind of look at Byrne maybe and say, like if I was sitting here talking about a Byrne Kilcoo final, I'd find it really hard, given the way things have gone between the two of them so often in recent years. You'd really struggle to make a case for anything anything different. But with Carried-off, there's not that baggage. So I would, I think that's a big asset. Like, I think they'll fancy the job.
Neil, thanks very much for your insight. And I suppose over the next few weeks we'll find out if it's title or something brand new. So you'll has to keep tuned in.
No bother. Thanks, Mal.
Thanks, Neil. So that's the story in Down. A surprise, Magheracloone beating Cardiff by the margin they did, and Scottstown are still there, always have been. So what has been the breakdown, Sean?
Yeah, Monaghan's interesting, Mal. You mentioned Magheracloone. I suppose this was not a strange quarterfinal, but I think a lot of people would have been having Cardiff as the big favourites to come through it, because they've been big contenders in the senior championship for the last couple of years since coming up from intermediate. Magheracloone are just up from intermediate, although they had a good league campaign, they reached the league final. I think Cardiff would have been big favourites due to the fact they beat Scottstown in the last round of the group stages as well. So this was a massive victory for Mahercloon. They were 1-9 to no score up after 22 minutes, which is just incredible. An incredible start for them. Jamie Cairns got the goal, and I think he had a real brilliant display at midfield against Jason McGee, who obviously the Donegal star. He obviously plays midfield for Cardiff, so I suppose that sent Mahercloon on their way. Now Cardiff did come back with a bit of a rally before half time. They got a goal of their own by Michael Connolly, and the score was 1-9 to 1-2 at half time, but it was all Mahercloon again. They got another goal, Jack Dugan got another goal, and Alan Cairns and Alan McGahey both hit 4 points apiece throughout the game. So a huge win for Mahercloon, 2-14 to 1-5. Not many people would have called a Mahercloon victory, never mind by that margin. So it sets up an interesting semi-final for them. They face Enniskeane. Enniskeane obviously topped their group. They were in the county final a couple of years ago, and it's actually two Armagh men on the sideline. John McEntee is in charge of Enniskeane, and Damien Feeney from Middletown, he's in charge of Mahercloon. So that's going to be a really interesting one, but it's only going to be the curtain raiser to the main event, which is going to be Clontibret and Scottstown. Obviously, they drew in the group stages. They played in the final last year. Scottstown won. So I know we had Fergal Monaghan on the podcast a couple of weeks ago now, and he felt that Clontibret were the only team that could maybe stop Scottstown from winning the championship. So if they're going to do it, they're going to do it at the semi-final stage. Scottstown, yeah, convincing winners over Latin. 123 to 11 points in the end. Jack McCarron hit 0-8, he had two pointers from play. Michael McCarville got the goal that put Scottstown 5 up at half time. It was 1-9 to 0-11. And then Scottstown came out in the second half and they outscored Latin 0-14 to 0-4. So it was a mix of the youth on experience for Scottstown, and the likes of Jack McCarron, Darren Hughes, Rory Began all playing well, although Rory Began actually didn't score. I think he's the top scorer for Scottstown in the championship, but he didn't get on the score sheet. Damien McArdle, the captain, had another good game, but the young boys too stepped up. The likes of Max McGuire and Tommy Mullen as well, who Tommy Mullen, I remember seeing him when he was a Monaghan minor that year. They got to the Ireland final against Derry, and he was class. I remember noting down the name just to keep an eye on him. So he got in for Scottstown yesterday and put in a really good display. So they've a lot of good players, as we know, a lot of young boys coming through, but that was a convincing win without Conor McCarthy and Ryan O'Toole, who would obviously be two county stars as well. So Scottstown motoring along well, and as I say, that victory sets up a brilliant semi-final. I think it's a double header in Clonus on Sunday, themselves and Clontibret. So it's going to two semi-finals really to look forward to in Monaghan.
In Antrim this weekend, there's two key hurling semi-finals. St John's obviously are booked their place in the final, first time in 31 years. After extra time, Connor Johnson with 8 points. I think Cushendall lost Neil McManus maybe in the middle of the game, which would be a significant loss. But I think it was the impact off the bench that helped the Johnnies to victory. Shock, and perhaps it is, but if you sort of dig deep, they've been really, really close. Sort of the hard luck story of recent seasons. And I was chatting to somebody yesterday actually at the Derry hurling final, and they were up at a blitz in Corrigan last week, and all the senior players were helping out at it and had trained that morning and seemed in really good form. And then they're going to be meeting Loughran in the final, who turned over to Loy by a point. They were without their captain, Tiernan Coyle. James McNaughton scored 1-7. You're chatting about the new breed in Scottstown, like Rowan Fitzgerald scored a goal for no, sorry, he might have actually scored the 1 point for Loughran. So it's good to see new teams coming, or sorry, new players coming on board. Keelan Roy scored 1-5 for Dunloy, and they had Connor feed into their county football preparations. The final next weekend. Dunloy had one chance right at the end. Sean Elliott had a shot, but it didn't. It wasn't on target, and it's Loughran who go through. And I suppose surprisingly, they haven't won the championship since 2016, which is you sort of forget that. So that's the lie of the land. And for Fermanagh and I think Aaron Gales were 6 down or something, but they're still standing.
Yeah, that's it. I think the Three are maybe it's the third final in 4 years at this point, and they're
Mm.
obviously defending champions. A very close game against Ederney. They end up winning by a point, I suppose says it all. Ederney were leading by 6 points with about 10 minutes to go. Then Aaron Gales got a goal that I suppose breathed fresh life into their challenge. They got a 2-pointer from Oshin Ken. Callum, sorry, heading into the an injury time really, and then Shane Rooney popped up with a winning score, So tough one for Aaron Gales, and Ederney will review a sequence of missed chances in the first half. They were actually leading by 1-3 to a point after about 15 minutes, and they were really in this end. The same probably should have been further up really at half time, and I suppose they ended up ruining it as Gary Gales came back into it. But at the same time, heading into the final 10 minutes, Ederney had sort of re-established themselves, and looked more likely to win. As I said, they were 6 points up, so Aaron Gales did extremely well to bring that one out. The other semi-final couldn't have been more contrasting, really. Derek Only beat the Timor really convincingly. It was 3-6 to 8 points, So they're basically it sets up a repeat of the 2016 and the 2023 finals. On those occasions, both games were close. Obviously, we'll preview those games. We'll preview the final more extensively in the next week or two. But it sets up a good final, and I suppose what you're seeing at Derry Donnelly is a wee bit of a transition. There's youngsters like Conor Asdale and Aidan Buckley who scored goals. They've won Derry Donnelly. I think they're going for their 8th county senior title since 2015. And there was a core group of players who obviously led that charge, but there are young players coming through the ranks. So the good days to be back and Derry Donnelly. Not that they ever really went away for long.
So I landed from Anna. I think this weekend we'll have more games coming up. We'll be back next Monday, obviously, to sum them up. And check GaelicLife.com. We have a full list of all the Ulster Club fixtures at the moment about who plays who and what way the counties will be crossing paths as the rest of the season goes on. So check back to GaelicLife.com. We have podcasts here every Monday and every Thursday. And thanks very much to Niall and to Sean and also to Neil who jumped on to fill us in on the down scene. So a few cups still to be handed out. So we'll have to see how it pans out.
Cheers, Mal.